It is the long-awaited Steam Deck impressions. I don't even really want to call it a review. I just bought one because I wanted it. So, growing up, I only had a Game Boy. It was a second-hand Game Boy that I actually traded, I think it was a 2400 baud modem for some computer stuff, because I've been fixing things. And there was a lot of times where I was sitting somewhere bored to death, and I wanted something to do. And I had an HP 100LX Palm Top, which I used for taking school notes and things like that. But, wasn't really a lot of fun. You couldn't play Zelda on that or anything else. So when Valve was doing this, and with all of the other stuff that Valve is doing around supporting Linux, I thought, well, it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, normally I start a review with the technical specifications for something like this, but if we dive into the technical specifications of the Steam Deck, it's absolutely anemic. And this is the most expensive Steam Deck. This is the 512 gigabyte version, and it is upgradable, but it's not exactly upgradable. Like, you shouldn't upgrade it. We'll talk more about that in a minute, and all the hardware specs and all the gobbledygook. But basically, does this accomplish what it sets out to be, which is a portable PC game console, and is it a game changer? And I think it is. And it's not perfect. It's far from perfect. It has a lot of flaws. I just got the 3.3 update while I was doing the review, which actually fixed some of the flaws that I ran into. The most annoying one is that sometimes the input would stop. So I was playing Desk Job, and the control input stopped, but the touchscreen kept working. And I think that's a pretty common failure, but in 3.3 so far, that has not happened again. We've got, the analog sticks. I don't know if that's what they're called. They click and they move around and they're analog. The ABXY button, which, that's that's all we had back in my day. Left and right triggers, 3 buttons. There's a lot of controls here. Got the D-pad. These are touch-sensitive, cursors on either side, and I found myself just sort of naturally moving from the joysticks to the touchpad interface. You can definitely tell that Steam has done a lot of work here. I haven't found very many games yet that support the haptic control. That was actually pretty cool on the Desk Job game that Steam has. You can actually use the device, you put your thumb just on the button, and it knows that your thumb is on the button, and then you can do all this kind of stuff. Setting this up, it was basically idiot-proof. The fact that this runs Linux, you'd never really know unless you really dive into it and you're really interested in that. I'm actually going to cover the Linux stuff in a separate video. It is appliance-like. You can play Chrome. Yeah, Chrome, the web browser. You have a touch keyboard. Unlike Android or other portable devices, it doesn't really know when to bring up the keyboard. So you have to do that yourself manually. Again, that's kind of an annoyance, but otherwise it works shockingly well. Now, technical specifications. So this is a special CPU for Steam. If we go into About, we can see that it's AMD and that it has 16 gigabytes of memory. But you look at the CPU specs and the GPU specs and you think, will this have the longevity that it really should? Because I'm looking at like Minis Forum machines and other relatively low power APU things, and the APU horsepower is just going like this. It's a very steep curve. And now might not be the right time to buy something like this, because the next generation and the next generation is going to have a tremendously more powerful APU. But then I got to thinking about it, and I think that this is actually going to have much more longevity than most people realize. And the reason for that is because the hardware encoding and decoding on this is surprisingly good. What am I getting at? You're not actually going to play the games on this. This is going to be sort of a natural partnership. I bet Valve ends up partnering with Stadia before Google shuts down Stadia, or something like that, so that you can actually do cloud gaming. If you don't do cloud gaming, you can stream back to your own machine, which I think we should all really fight for, because all the game companies are trying to figure out, well, all the bad game companies anyway, are trying to figure out how to charge us extra for streaming from the machines that we already own and have games on. Which, by the way, that experience on this was incredible. If you have a game that supports controller input and not mouse and keyboard input, streaming from your desktop machine with whatever it has is an incredible experience. The place where this might fall short in terms of like the GPU has enough horsepower argument is being able to run a VR headset off of it. I know that was something that was talked about early in the Valve press stuff, but on this hardware with Linux and where we are with Vulkan and the performance, I would be surprised if that happens and it's a reasonable experience. But even if you don't want to play games locally on this 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, playing a AAA title that otherwise just isn't going to fit in 16 gigabytes of RAM or even 512 gigabytes of space. I mean, I put Borderlands 3 on this thing, which is an older AAA title. 512 gigabytes, that's enough room for like 3, 4 games, 5 games that are AAA, maybe 5 games. But if you're streaming it, it's no problem at all. I actually was streaming through my cell phone's hotspot, which is definitely a not ideal situation, and that worked great. Now, if you install Tailscale on this, it's a Linux thing. You can color outside the lines, go to that command prompt and do all kinds of fun stuff, which is way outside the scope of this video. Then this thing can have a VPN back to anywhere, and depending on what kind of VPN you do, it may not be a terrible latency penalty. And then all of a sudden, boom, you've got all kinds of stuff going on. But I think Valve is going to take care of that for us. I think Valve is going to let you do more than LAN streaming in the end in a clean way. I think that's supposed to work now, but for me, for whatever reason, it wasn't actually working from the internet. But through the VPN, not a problem, and not really a lot of additional latency. Playing games locally, I tried Doom Eternal, and Doom Eternal admittedly is a really super optimized title, but it's very smooth, surprisingly smooth. Actually, I expected to complain about Doom Eternal because it can get really intense. And there's no complaints. In fact, it did so much better than I expected it to with the relatively anemic hardware. That's why I sort of am a little bit remiss to talk about the actual hardware. Like, I don't want to talk about the specs because the specs here are so well leveraged that it would imply a disparity where none exists. It's shockingly good. Also played Factorio, Monster Train, games like that. It's not really RimWorld. Riftbreaker, okay, is a little more challenging. But, yeah, it was fine. And that's local play, not even streaming play, local play. There's really a lot of games in my library that run fine locally. This is the more premium anti-glare display. I've seen other people's Steam Decks that don't have the anti-glare display. Honestly, I can't really tell a lot of difference. The anti-glare display is nice, but it's not a substantial upgrade over the other one. This also came with a nice carry case, which has like a Velcro pouch on the back, or it has a pouch on the back for the power brick. So it's nice to have that because I am kind of destructive and just dropping this in your laptop bag with the control stick sticking up. Well, it's a good thing that Valve has a reasonable repair policy when it comes to these. Now, there's a lot of other videos you should check out on retro gaming and retro console stuff. I'm not going to cover that because certain IP holding companies are real handsy when it comes to their intellectual property. And I think that's very anti-consumer. I think we as consumers need to band together and put an end to that. If I own the physical cartridge from way back when and I want to format shift that into something else and be able to play it on here, that should be my legal right. When you look at things like what Nintendo has done, for example, where you would have the store on the Wii U and you could buy older games that you had and enjoyed for a reasonable price, and then those things just sort of go away and your games evaporate. That may still happen one day with Steam, but for games that you own and have locally, even in sort of a gray area, they're not going away. You'll have them from now till the end of time. The Oregon Trail will run on here and be completely fine from now until the end of time. If you want to run OS2 Warp, you can run OS2 Warp on this via a virtual machine because it's basically a PC without any issues whatsoever because you have a copy of OS2 Warp. So in that regard, this is really the forever console. The games that you have on here are yours, not on the Steam side, but on the PC side, and being able to run stuff. And you'll be able to run them forever. Forever and ever, and ever and ever and ever and ever. You can add other game systems to this, like good old games, but we enter into a dimension of not user-friendliness, and again, like I say, I think Valve is being a good steward of the community and the stuff that they have available in this in terms of, well, it's Linux, but they're doing a lot of work to make Windows games run on Linux, and that's going to be powered by money, and okay, that's fine. Perhaps it's just a matter of perception, and I don't mean for this to be preachy, but this is a thing that factored into my purchase. One of the reasons I bought this is because of Valve, and maybe it's just my own idiocy, but it seems like Valve has more respect for the rights of the gamer using their platform than Nintendo. maybe that's not actually true. Maybe Valve doesn't see its users as anything more than cattle, which is my impression of Nintendo. And you have to work really hard as a company to flush that much goodwill down the toilet. But that's just how business is done in the 21st century, because there's money to be made, right? Valve could be making more money on these, but they're not. And that's because they want everybody to have these, and they want to build a future market. So maybe that's an investment, or maybe that's good business, or maybe that's just not anti-consumer. I don't know. But that's enough about that. Oh, I almost forgot, hardware upgrades. 512 gigabytes, yeah, just a few games. You can't upgrade it. So I've got a Toshiba M.2 that's really tiny, 1 terabyte, and it will fit in here. And it should fit within the power requirements. Yeah, there's another variable that you may not be considering. M.2 is like the Samsung 991. They will generally demand more power than this thing can supply. The M.2 in these is specifically picked for low power and stability in battery usage type scenarios. So if you are going to upgrade the M.2, bear that in mind. Bear that it's not recommended. It's not for the faint of heart. Not just any super compact M.2 would work. There's not physically enough room in there for a full-size M.2. If you check out iFixit, for example, their teardown, you can see what's going on there. But Kioxia sent me their new super tiny M.2s, both the PCIe Gen 3 and the PCIe Gen 4 variants. Now, the Gen 3 variants actually will use even less power than Gen 4. You can find those online. It's about $100 a terabyte, $130 a terabyte, something like that. I'm running that in here, and so far so good, but your mileage may vary. So maybe check back with me in a month or two and make sure that it's still perfectly stable and perfectly reasonable and perfectly good. I actually probably need to build an M.2 power meter or something like that. Maybe I can get into that. Oh, and it does have a micro SD card slot here on the bottom, so you can put games on that, and surprisingly the performance of that's pretty good. So 1 terabyte, M.2, those don't use a lot of power, and that would work. And that's the normie option. Just shove a micro SD card in there. You're good to go. Final thoughts and conclusions. There's not really anything that I can complain about. The battery life is hugely varied, depending on what you're playing. You could get anywhere from 5 or 6 hours of playtime to an hour and a half, depending on what it is that you're doing. And I'm not entirely sure that the couple of times that I experienced, sort of an hour and a half battery life, that it wasn't because the game was doing something or the previous game that I was playing didn't exit correctly. Another thing that I think that you don't notice is a problem until you play with something like this, the power button, it suspends and resumes pretty much instantly. So like Doom Eternal, I'll pick on Doom Eternal. When you launch Doom Eternal, you have to wait forever for all the logos and the nonsense. Like, look at us, we're an amazing game company. After I've seen that like 8 times, I don't want to see that anymore. That is ridiculous. It is really, really ridiculous when you whip this thing out and you just want to play a game real quick. You have to sit there and wait about a minute to get through all of the nonsense to be able to pick up where you left off. But if you're in the game and you hit the power button, the thing will go to sleep. And then when you wake it up later, you're exactly right where you left off. That is a huge feature. You should be able to launch games instantly. That is a quality of life improvement. It is incredible. I would love to be able to launch games instantly, like launching, like PUBG, Grand Theft Auto, Doom Eternal. They waste thousands of man-years of time because of their slow load times that are completely unnecessary. We can suspend and resume the game. That should be a thing. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. This has been my first thoughts on my Steam Deck. Let me get about 6 months of usage, or 3 or 4 months of usage under my belt. I'm about 2.5, 3 weeks in at this point. And we'll do a deeper dive on some of the cool Linux stuff you can do with this on the Level 1 Linux channel. So be sure to stay tuned and check that out. Yeah, USB-C dock, display out. You can do a lot of really awesome stuff with this, but that will have to come in a future video. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. I'm signing out, and you can find me in the Level 1 forums. Let me know what cool stuff you're doing with your Steam Deck, especially if you're a Linux enthusiast, because, yeah, you can show it off in the Level 1 forum because, really, you don't have any friends that understand what you're doing anyway. Come show it off there. All right. I'll take a look at it. I'll see you there.